Hey guys, tonight we ease into a vine-covered slope under a lavender sky. The kind of place where the air smells like crushed grapes and someone is definitely playing a reed flute way too slowly. You walk along a dirt path that's soft underfoot, maybe because it's part soil, part spilled wine from festivals past. Fireflies blink lazily as if they, too, are a little tipsy. You pass under trellises heavy with dark grapes. Grapes that never get picked because, honestly, Dionysus keeps refilling them for aesthetic. And there he is, Dionysus, reclining like it's his full-time job, barefoot on a pile of animal skins that somehow look both ancient and dry-cleaned. His hair is a little too curly to be accidental, his robe slipping off one shoulder in a way that definitely took an hour to stage. In one hand, a goblet, if you can call something that large a goblet, brimming with wine so red it glows in the moonlight. He raises it slightly in your direction, not quite a toast, more like a sleepy nod from the god of pre-party naps. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and what time it is where you're listening. I love seeing how far this cozy chaos reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle onto a warm stone seat beside him. Dionysus doesn't say much. He's more of a vibes guy, but you sense it. This isn't going to be an epic tale of warfare and ego battles. No one's getting their liver eaten by an eagle tonight. Instead, you're stepping into a mellow myth, a wine-soaked meander through the life of a god who invented happy hour and then refused to leave. Despite being part of the 12 Olympians, Dionysus was always different. The other gods had themes like war, wisdom, thunder. He had wine, theater, and questionable life choices. A mythological wildcard, if you will. But where Ares strutted and Athena plotted, Dionysus sort of lounged. He was chaos, yes, but like the soft kind of chaos. The one where your socks don't match, your plans fall through, but somehow you end up at a bonfire with strangers who give you warm bread and don't ask questions. And unlike most Greek gods, Dionysus didn't come straight from Olympus with a birth certificate signed in lightning. His origins were mortal adjacent, filled with awkward family dynamics and a surprising amount of leg-based childcare. But more on that in a minute. As the crickets hum and Dionysus half snoozes with a panther curled at his feet. Yes, a panther. Don't question it. You begin to realize, this god isn't about glory or conquest. He's about surrender. Surrendering to laughter, to music, to the unexplainable weirdness of being alive. And honestly, that might be the most divine thing of all. Here's a mainstream fact to sip on. Dionysus was the only major Olympian god with a mortal mother. That gave him a strange middle ground status, part divinity, part humanity. Historians still argue whether that made him more relatable or just more annoying to the other gods, but it definitely explains why he didn't fit the mold. And here's your fringe tidbit of the night. In some rural cults, Dionysus was worshipped not just with wine and music, but with bees. Yes, bees. Tiny buzzing friends seen as symbols of both chaos and sweetness. Basically Dionysus in insect form. As you breathe in the scent of fermented fruit and smoldering sage, you begin to feel it too. That sleepy drift into the in-between. The place where nothing is urgent and every story takes its time. You don't remember falling asleep beside Dionysus, but somehow you're still there. Though now, the moon has shifted and someone's draped a leopard print blanket over your shoulders. Probably symbolic, but also surprisingly warm. You blink slowly, and the god is staring into the embers of a fire that wasn't there before, holding a fig between his fingers like it contains the secrets of the cosmos. He tosses it into his mouth without chewing. See, Dionysus wasn't like the other Olympians, and it wasn't just the whole being fun at parties thing. From the start, he didn't really belong. Most gods were born on Olympus, raised among the clouds by divine relatives and golden babysitters. Dionysus, born in Thebes, as in real place, real buildings, real mortality. Not even a fancy mountain in sight. The Greek pantheon was like a high school clique, and Dionysus was the artsy transfer student who brought his own snacks and didn't understand why everyone was obsessed with lightning bolts. The other gods had their thrones polished and their domains assigned. Dionysus had to crash the party, literally. There are myths where he shows up at Olympus, and the other gods alike. Who invited the guy with the grape crown and the flute-playing interns? Zeus, his dad, did vouch for him, though that may have been out of guilt. More on that juicy tale later. Still, Dionysus didn't get immediate membership. He had to prove himself with a strange combination of suffering, world travel, and inventing the concept of recreational intoxication. Not exactly the resume Hera was looking for. One of the earliest stories has Dionysus wandering the earth, unsure of who or what he is, raised in secret, hidden from jealous gods, and shuffled between forests and caves. He grows up in the kind of chaotic environment that therapists dream about. He learns about plants, music, and human emotion before he learns who his dad even is. Imagine growing up thinking you're just a moody vineyard intern, only to find out you're technically a god. And yet, despite the confusion, he always had this core joy. Messy, unpredictable, often dangerous, but joy all the same. That's what makes Dionysus so strange and so oddly lovable. He's the god who doesn't demand obedience. He offers escape. He doesn't lead armies. He throws festivals. He doesn't strike people down with lightning. He just occasionally turns them into dolphins. It's a vibe. Here's your historical anchor for the night. Dionysus wasn't always included in the earliest lists of the 12 Olympians. In fact, Hestia, the hearth goddess, was often listed instead. Over time, as Dionysian cults spread and theater became a cultural staple, he nudged his way into that divine dozen, politely but with wine. Historians still argue whether this shift represents changing religious practices or just better PR. Dionysus had a way of winning people over, not with fear, but with freedom. And when mortals started needing a god who spoke to their more chaotic, emotional, messy sides, he was already there, holding a goblet and humming a flute solo. Let's not forget the fringe detail. Some ancient writers claim Dionysus was a latecomer twice. There were not one, but two Dionysi, an older and a younger version, confused and blended together over centuries. As if one wine-loving god wasn't enough, mythologists decided we might have had multiple, like a reboot of an already confusing franchise. You can almost hear the scrolls rustling in frustration. As the fire crackles and the panther now uses your foot as a pillow, you let the warmth of the strange, cozy chaos settle around you. Dionysus glances over, eyes gleaming like he knows every weird thing you've ever done after midnight, and approves. The fire burns lower, casting long shadows that stretch across the vineyard like lazy cats. Dionysus flicks a grape into the embers and sighs deeply, the kind of sigh that comes right before a juicy family drama recap. You scoot a little closer, blanket still around your shoulders, as the god begins to murmur, not with his mouth, but in the way the night air starts to carry the story itself. So, let's talk about Semele, Dionysus's mother. Mortal, beautiful, probably had no idea that dating the king of the gods came with a death clause. Semele was a princess of Thebes, which sounds glamorous until you remember it was ancient Greece. So princess meant occasionally wore shoes. Zeus saw her, fell in love, or at least in something, and did what Zeus does best, disguises himself and seduces her. Standard Olympian behavior. But unlike most of Zeus's flings, Semele got pregnant. And here's where things take a turn so absurd it borders on theater. Hera, Zeus's wife and queen of calculated revenge, found out. Because of course she did. Hera always finds out. And rather than tossing a lightning bolt, she chose the long game, manipulation. She disguised herself as an old woman and cozied up to Semele, befriended her, gained her trust. Then, like a mean girl in a toga, whispered, "Are you sure your boyfriend is really Zeus? I mean, he hasn't shown you his true form." Semele, being pregnant, hormonal, and 19 kinds of confused, starts to spiral. She demands Zeus reveal himself in all his divine glory. Now, Zeus loves a dramatic moment, but he also knows what happens when mortals see gods unfiltered. It's like staring directly into a supernova while being made of papier-mâché. He begs her to reconsider. She refuses. He promises. She insists. So he does it. And she dies. Instantly. Incinerated. Vaporized. Not with anger, just with divine intensity. Zeus is devastated, which for him is saying something. Most of the time he treats consequences like optional side quests. But the baby, tiny, fragile, almost fully grown, is still alive. And Zeus, panicked, does what any logical immortal would do in a crisis. He rips open his thigh and stitches the fetus inside. Let's pause there. Thigh. Stitches. Gestation. Yes, according to myth, Dionysus was born from Zeus's leg, making him not just divine, but twice born, first from a mortal womb, then from the flesh of a god. This gave him a kind of spiritual weirdness, a liminality that set him apart forever. He was neither fully mortal nor entirely divine. He belonged to both realms, and by extension none. Here's your historical grounding for this strange tale. The title Dionysus, the twice-born, Dionysus Deintor, became a central motif in his mystery cults, particularly those in Eleusis and Orphic traditions. These initiations use the idea of rebirth, emotional, spiritual, sometimes literal, as a path to transcendence. Modern scholars connect it to themes of transformation and identity, especially during rites of passage. Historians still argue whether Simile's incineration was always part of the original myth, or if it was added later to emphasize Dionysus's unique birth and justify his place among the gods. Either way, it's an origin story with some heat. And the fringe fact for tonight: in some lesser-known versions of the myth, Zeus doesn't sew Dionysus into his thigh by choice. Instead, Hermes does it for him while Zeus is unconscious, meaning even Zeus may have passed out from stress, which is comforting in a weird way. As the night deepens and the stars rearrange themselves like lazy pixels in the sky, you glance again at Dionysus. He doesn't look like someone born out of trauma. But then again, maybe that's why he laughs so easily, because he understands the weight of sorrow. And instead of fighting it, he invites it to dance. The fire's gone low now, just embers and the occasional lazy crackle. Dionysus stretches, feline-like, and tosses a sprig of something fragrant, probably thyme, possibly weed, into the coals. A puff of smoke wafts upward, and with it, your mind drifts again, deeper into his childhood. Because being born from a thigh is only the beginning when your life is curated by Greek tragedy and woodland chaos. After Zeus's rather experimental delivery method, Dionysus needed protection. Hera, still holding the grudge of Olympus, was not finished with her divine stepchild. So Zeus, doing his best to be a single parent with lightning duties, sent baby Dionysus away, into hiding. Again, he was tucked into the arms of Hermes, who pulled off the ancient world's fastest emergency babysitter routine and whisked him far from Olympus. Where to? That's where things get delightfully fuzzy. According to one version, Hermes handed him off to a mountain of nymphs in Nyssa. In another, he was raised by his aunt Ino, Simile's sister, and her husband, who tried to disguise him in girl's clothing, which, if nothing else, gave Dionysus some serious gender-fluid flair right from the start. And in a few especially chaotic stories, the caretakers included a troupe of satyrs, goat-legged, flute-tooting forest bros who drank too much and definitely didn't pass any background checks. Imagine growing up surrounded by tipsy mentors, vine-covered trees, and women who talked to streams. It was a childhood full of rhythm and roots, laughter and low-level mayhem. No Olympian marble halls, no divine etiquette classes, just dancing feet, fermenting berries, and the occasional talking animal. And it worked. Sort of. Dionysus grew strong, but not in the polished way of Apollo or the strategic way of Athena. His power bubbled, wild, emotional, soft and terrible all at once. He could charm you with a smile, or drive you mad with a glance. Cozy chaos, remember? Historically, this period in his life is interpreted as symbolic of the gods' wandering years, not just literally moving from place to place, but representing the stages of personal transformation. Just as wine must ferment, Dionysus too had to stew a while before reaching his full strength. The secrecy of his upbringing also ties him to the mystery religions, cults with secret initiations, hidden truths, and late-night rituals involving masks, torches, and possibly hallucinogenic honey. Now, historians still argue whether these mystery rites began because of Dionysus, or whether he was grafted onto already existing rural traditions. It's a chicken and grape kind of question. What's certain is that he came to represent all those transitional, borderless states: dreams, madness, intoxication, grief, ecstasy. The feelings you can't quite name when you're between who you were and who you're becoming. And here's your fringe tidbit to chew on like a fermented fig. In some Thracian myths, Dionysus was taught to make wine not by nymphs, but by a talking serpent. Yes, snake sommelier. It's weirdly on brand for a god whose every friend group seems like an open mic night gone rogue. One evening, during his nymph and satyr phase, Dionysus supposedly invented the first formal drinking party, what the Greeks later called a symposium. The name sounds serious, but it was basically wine, snacks, poetry, and some light philosophizing. He didn't want to teach war. He wanted to teach communion. So there he was, growing up in a swirl of incense, goat hooves, and wooden flutes. Never quite stable, never entirely alone. Learning to command not with power, but with presence. He never roared. He whispered, and people followed. You stir under the blanket and realize the panther has vanished. Or maybe it was never there. Dionysus is still watching the smoke, his eyes reflecting something older than wine and far sadder than revelry. Maybe he remembers those years of hiding. Maybe he doesn't care. Either way, he reaches out and taps your goblet gently. A refill without asking. That's just how he is. You wake to birdsong, not the chirpy morning kind, but a slow, looping trill that sounds like it's trying out for a spot in an indie forest folk band. Dionysus is gone for now, but the vineyard remains, shimmering slightly, as though you've crossed into a version of Greece that belongs entirely to him. And now you're walking barefoot through a soft, mossy field. The air is heavy with the smell of grapes, wild thyme, and wood smoke. You're on the road with Dionysus, or rather, his road. The one he walked, danced, and occasionally stumbled along as he introduced wine to the known world. Yes, the god of wine went on a literal wine tour. And like all great artists, his early gigs were unpredictable, with a band of loyal, chaotic followers, satyrs with flutes, nymphs with jugs, and humans who honestly just liked a good time. Dionysus wandered far beyond Greece, Egypt, Phrygia, India. Some say he made it all the way to the Himalayas, though honestly, no one's really sure if that wasn't just an exaggerated press release from the 5th century BC. What is known, at least from myth and vase art, is that everywhere he went, wine followed. He taught locals how to cultivate vines, crush grapes, ferment joy. And he didn't just hand over instructions. He threw a party. Each city received a surprise Dionysian festival, whether they wanted one or not. Usually they did. There's a historical fact for your scroll collection. The spread of Dionysian worship mirrored the real spread of viticulture across the Mediterranean and Near East. Where the god wandered, vineyards sprouted. It's one of the only cases in myth where religion, agriculture, and lifestyle were quite literally drinking from the same cup. But not everyone was thrilled. Take, for example, the story of King Pentheus of Thebes. He wasn't exactly Dionysus's biggest fan. In fact, when Dionysus came back to his birthplace and started hosting wild festivals in the hills, Pentheus tried to shut it all down. He banned the rites, mocked the god, and told everyone to stop wearing leafy crowns and chanting in the woods. Bad move, Pentheus. Dionysus didn't get angry in the usual thunderbolt way. Instead, he invited Pentheus to a private show, convinced him to dress as a woman, a recurring theme with his god, and led him into the forest to spy on the women's secret rites. The king, peeking through the leaves, never made it out, because in their frenzy, the women mistook him for a lion, or a boar, or something dangerous. Whatever it was, they tore him apart. And the kicker? His own mother Agave was the one who dealt the fatal blow. Eyes glassy with divine madness, heart full of frenzied devotion. It's one of those myths you hear and go, wow, that escalated. But it also drives home Dionysus's paradox. Joy and terror, comfort and danger. His festivals weren't just parties, they were purges. Places where people let go so completely, they forgot where they ended and the god began. Historians still argue whether these rites were genuinely religious or just cleverly disguised raves. Were they mystical transformations, or just group therapy with better snacks. No one agrees, but everyone agrees they were loud. Want a fringe detail? In some lesser-told versions of his eastern travels, Dionysus defeats armies not with weapons, but with ivy. He causes enemies to drop their swords and start dancing, their shields turning into tambourines. It's like a fantasy novel written by someone who had one glass of wine too many. The beauty of Dionysus's tour was that it wasn't conquest, it was invitation. No one had to join, but many did. Because he didn't demand worship, he whispered it in dreams, in longing, in laughter that turns into tears and back again. He found the soft places in people, the parts that needed release, and filled them with music and wine. You pause near an olive tree wrapped in old silk ribbons, remnants of an offering. There's a half-empty cup of something sweet left on a rock. You drink it because, well, this isn't a story for logic. It tastes like plums and nostalgia. Somewhere in the distance, you hear hooves and a tambourine. Dionysus is still on the move. You follow. Your bare feet brush against dry grass and wildflowers as the sound of drums begins to build. Slow at first, like a heartbeat, then rising into a kind of lazy thunder. Dionysus is ahead of you again, but he's not walking. He's riding in a chariot pulled by leopards. Or maybe they're tigers. The myth changes depending on who painted the vase. Either way, they're lounging forward as if they too had a few sips from the divine barrel. The entourage is back. Satyrs twirling through clouds of incense. Nymphs giggling behind ivy-draped curtains. Mortals trailing along, trying not to spill their drinks. This is no invasion. This is an arrival. The birth of a gift, wine. It's hard to explain how revolutionary wine was in ancient times. Today it's a dinner accessory or a sleepy time supplement. But back then, it was almost magic. A liquid that changed how you thought, how you felt, even how you saw the world. Dionysus didn't just introduce a beverage. He introduced a new way to exist. In some myths, he doesn't even explain the process. He just shows up at a village, smiles at a grapevine, and leaves it blooming with impossible fruit. Wine wasn't something you earned. It was something you received, like a blessing, or a curse, depending on how your night went. Here's your historical nugget to swirl. Archaeologists have found evidence of early Greek winemaking dating back to around 2000 BCE. But the ritual use of wine didn't explode until the spread of Dionysian cults. The Greeks weren't the first to ferment grapes, but they may have been the first to make a god out of it. And like all new ideas, it met resistance. Not every town liked Dionysus waltzing in, handing out chalices, and untying social norms. Some saw it as dangerous, especially for women, who were central to his rites. But for those who were tired of rules, repression, and the same five gods telling them what to do, Dionysus was a revelation. A barefoot god with a cheeky smile and a vine-covered staff who said, "Maybe you don't have to hold it all together. Maybe it's okay to unravel." In one of his more chaotic pit stops, Dionysus arrived on the island of Icaria, where the locals had never seen wine before. He gave them vines. They drank. And then they didn't stop. The entire village reportedly blacked out for days. When they woke, they named the drink oinos after their visitor. Whether or not that's etymologically sound is up for debate, but the hangover, probably real. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's mythic travels reflect actual trade routes, places where Greek colonists brought vines and stories at the same time. Some scholars think his journey to India was a late addition, a way to stretch his resume during the Hellenistic period. Others think it points to real cultural exchanges, wine for spices, myths for silk. And now, your fringe fact, there are records of ancient rituals where followers of Dionysus would plant a jar of wine underground for a full season, believing the earth would bless it. Some buried it under fig trees, others beneath the full moon. One site even had a spring where people whispered their secrets to the wine before drinking it. Therapy, but with more fermentation. You stop walking, not because you're tired, but because you've arrived. In the clearing ahead, there's no temple, just a circle of stones, a hollowed log for a drum, and a vine-covered amphora taller than you. Someone hands you a cup, and it's full before you realize you're thirsty. The taste is darker this time. Notes of blackberry, clove, and something ancient. You sip, and your breath slows. Dionysus is watching from a tree branch above. Reclined like a cat, crown askew. He raises his goblet lazily. Not a command, just an invitation. The drums begin again. Somewhere, someone's laughing too hard. The vines twist upward like they're trying to listen. You sit down in the grass and close your eyes. Let it all rise and settle. This is the moment Dionysus lives for. Not the climax, not the fall. The in-between. The stillness after the first cup, before the second. The part where you forget what the rules were and remember how it feels to be soft. The laughter fades into murmurs. The drums quiet into occasional thuds, and you find yourself alone again, though not in the sad way. In the Dionysian way. The party has simply moved on, probably chasing the next village or the next full moon. You stretch, feeling the sweet ache of rest well earned, and wander toward the edge of the clearing, where the vines start to look like curtains and the forest folds in like a theater set. That's when you hear the sea. Waves soft and steady, brushing the shore like someone smoothing a sheet. The smell of salt and pine is thick in the air, and you follow it, barefoot still, until you reach a cliff above the Aegean. The moon casts silver across the waves, and there, bobbing not far from the rocks, is a ship. A modest one. Wooden. Painted once, maybe. And on board, a group of pirates. Now, pirates and Dionysus don't usually show up in the same sentence. But this story is real, or at least real enough to make it onto dozens of amphorae and countless temple murals. It begins, like many good Dionysus stories, with some guys making a very bad choice. A gang of Tyrrhenian pirates spots a handsome, strangely calm young man wandering the beach alone. He's dressed like royalty, gold trim, long hair, radiant skin. So they do what pirates do. They kidnap him, planning to sell him into slavery. That's right. They looked at a literal god and thought, let's flip this for cash. Rookie mistake. Once aboard, Dionysus stays silent, smiling faintly, gazing out at the sea, probably wondering how long it'll take them to figure it out. The ship starts moving, but soon things get strange. First, the smell of wine floods the deck. The ropes start sprouting ivy. The mast turns into a tree. A grapevine curls along the sails, like it's looking for something to cuddle. And then, because Dionysus loves a good reveal, he transforms, not just into a god, but into a lion, or sometimes a bear, depending on the storyteller's mood. Either way, not what you want appearing on your deck mid-voyage. Panic erupts. The pirates fling themselves overboard, and as they hit the water, they don't sink. They change. Into dolphins. That's the punchline. Dionysus turned them into dolphins, not out of cruelty, but because, well, why not? Now they get to frolic forever, leaping through waves, maybe still trying to process what just happened. Some versions say he spared the helmsman, the one guy who suspected the truth and tried to stop the others. Dionysus is chaotic, yes, but he's not unfair. Here's your historical anchor. This myth was a favorite subject in Greek vase art from the Archaic to the Classical period. Scholars believe it represented the taming of wild forces, the sea, pirates, even drunkenness, under the gentle but firm hand of Dionysian transformation. Historians still argue whether the dolphin myth was symbolic of cultural shifts, like the rise of maritime trade, or just a fun way to remind people not to kidnap suspiciously serene men in sandals. Either way, it stuck. And your fringe tidbit? In some versions, Dionysus doesn't transform himself at all. The ship simply fills with invisible music. The pirates become so overwhelmed with joy, they choose to leap into the sea. Like the god doesn't punish them. He just reveals too much beauty, and their brains short-circuit, which honestly feels very Dionysus. You sit on the cliff edge, toes brushing ivy that wasn't there 5 minutes ago, and look down at the water. For a moment, you think you see a dolphin leap, twist midair, and flash you what might be a wink. Or maybe it's just the moon playing tricks. Behind you, a flute picks up, soft, slow, slightly out of tune. The party is approaching again. But now you know, wherever Dionysus goes, there will be wine, transformation, and someone who probably should have read the warning signs. You stand, stretch, and take one last look at the sea. Somewhere out there, a pod of dolphins is still trying to figure out what hit them. The flute fades behind you as you descend into a narrow valley, where the air turns cooler, the vines thicken, and the light settles into a kind of gentle twilight that doesn't seem in a hurry to end. Dionysus is here again, but quieter this time, not lounging or riding panthers, just sitting, alone, by a small stream that hums like a lullaby. He looks almost ordinary, if ordinary means glowing faintly and using a leopard's tail as a scarf. You sit beside him. No fanfare, no cup of wine, just the hush of the woods and the occasional sigh of wind through cypress. Because here's a truth they don't teach in most mythology books. Dionysus, the god of madness and revelry, was also deeply melancholic. He wandered a lot, not just in celebration, but in retreat. Unlike the other Olympians, who stuck to their palaces and played king of the mountain with mortals, Dionysus often disappeared. Into forests, into caves, into himself. His was a divinity born of contradiction, joy and grief, noise and silence, madness and clarity. There were times, whole seasons, when Dionysus would vanish from public worship. Festivals would pause. Shrines would go quiet. People whispered that he had gone to the underworld or lost himself in his own dreams. But he always came back, transformed somehow, like winter turning reluctantly into spring. Here's your historical anchor. The Dionysian calendar included multiple phases, some wild, some reflective. During the Lenaya festival in Athens, for example, Dionysus was honored in his quiet form. Lesser known than his rowdy epithets like Bacchus or Liber, there was Dionysus Lysios, the releaser, a version of the god who helped people let go of pain, not just party stress. In the Orphic tradition, Dionysus was not merely a god of celebration. He was a god of suffering, even of resurrection. This fringe variant tells how he was born, torn apart by titans, and reassembled again. A myth scholars still argue over. Was it a symbolic retelling of the wine cycle, where grapes are crushed and reborn as wine? Or a deeper philosophical metaphor for death and renewal? Either way, it left a mark. Dionysus became associated with masks, not just in theater, but in personality. He was the god of slipping into something else, whether a role, a mood, or a state of mind. And behind that mask was someone who knew what it meant to break and mend. You glance sideways at him now, at the soft lines under his eyes, at the slight tension in his fingers as they trail through the water. Maybe he's remembering someone. Maybe he's just waiting for you to understand something that can't be said aloud. And this is where he feels most real. Not in the parades or the madness, but in the pause between. The quiet cave inside your chest. The moment when the laughter fades and you ask yourself, "Am I okay?" He doesn't answer. He just is. And that's the comfort. Dionysus isn't the god who fixes you. He's the god who sits beside you while you figure it out. He hands you a cup, not to numb you, but to remind you that the taste of sweetness and sorrow are often from the same fruit. The fringe image sticks in your mind. Some rural shrines didn't even have statues of Dionysus, just a post wrapped in ivy, or a mask nailed to a tree. No face, no body, just a presence, a space made sacred by the absence of certainty. You lean back against a warm rock and exhale. The stream hums. The forest doesn't expect anything from you. Dionysus doesn't either. Not all chaos is loud. Sometimes, it's the gentle unraveling of who you thought you had to be. The forest shifts again, not with movement, but with feeling. The air thickens ever so slightly, like walking into a room where incense was burned a few hours ago. You don't see Dionysus at first, but you hear him. Or maybe you just hear them, his followers. Not the nymphs or the flute-playing satyrs this time. No laughter, no music, just soft chanting, low and rhythmic, rising and falling like waves. You step cautiously into a clearing, and it's unlike any space you've seen on this dreamlike journey. No vines, no wine jugs, just a circle of women, barefoot and robed in fawnskins, eyes half-lidded with something that isn't sleep. They sway together in time, their movements synchronized, yet completely unchoreographed, like leaves caught in the same wind. This is a Dionysian thyasos, a gathering of worshippers, but not for a party. This is the deeper end of the pool. Here, people come not to drink, but to transform. You sit at the edge, unnoticed, as the chanting winds through you. It's not in Greek. It's older than that. A language made of breath and longing. One of the women steps forward and places her hand on a stone altar. Her lips move, but no sound comes out. And then she weeps, quietly, without shame. No one comforts her. They just witness it. As if in this sacred circle, that's enough. Here's the historical foundation. The cult of Dionysus wasn't all drinking contests and toga raves. It had layers. There were formal state festivals, yes, but also private rites, mystery initiations, and remote gatherings like this one. Women, in particular, played a central role in these worship practices, which was rare in ancient Greek religion. The Maenads, or Bacchae, weren't just drunk groupies. They were holy participants, seeking emotional catharsis and union with the divine. And here's the twist. These rituals worked. People came away from them altered. Reports from the time speak of possession states, spontaneous prophecies, and in rare cases, total amnesia, which might sound extreme, until you realize that most people didn't have therapy, self-help podcasts, or weekends off. They had masks, movement, and Dionysus. Historians still argue whether the ecstasy of Dionysian cults was induced by music, fasting, or herbal hallucinogens. Maybe all of the above. Maybe none. The point wasn't the method, it was the release. The surrender. Letting go of the self so completely that what returned felt reborn. And here's your fringe fact. One isolated mountain ritual involved women tearing apart a live animal, usually a goat, and consuming it raw, believing it contained the essence of Dionysus. Yes, it's a little much. But symbolically, it's about communion. Becoming one with the god. Not through prayer, but through instinct, blood, and chaos. Don't worry. No goats tonight. Dionysus finally appears, not dramatically, just suddenly there, behind the women. Not leading them, just among them. He looks softer than ever. Almost human. His crown of ivy is wilted. His eyes tired but kind. He makes no demands, offers no miracles. Just his presence. You realize, watching this scene, that the madness he offers isn't destruction. It's permission. To cry. To scream. To laugh so hard you snort and don't apologize. To stop pretending you're fine when you're not. To feel everything. Too much. Too deeply. And not be ashamed of it. The women eventually disperse like mist, leaving only the altar, the stones, and the silence. Dionysus sits beside you. Doesn't speak. Just breathes. His robe is damp with dew. His hair tangled. And yet, there's peace here. This is the heart of cozy chaos. Not the mess of broken things, but the mess of unburied things. The grief that lingers. The joy that follows it in the same breath. You lie back in the grass. Somewhere above, an owl calls once, then falls silent. The stars rearrange themselves into a vine you swear is moving. And Dionysus, the god of wine and wildness, simply hums a lullaby with no words at all. When you open your eyes again, it's morning, but not the blaring, coffee-required kind. This is a Dionysian morning. Mist clings to the ground like it's forgotten how to rise. The sun hangs low and sleepy. Everything feels warm, but not hot. You sit up, and your breath leaves your mouth in a soft puff, as though even the air is reluctant to fully wake. Dionysus is already standing, robe somehow clean again, eyes crinkled at the corners as if he's been laughing at some internal joke. He offers you a fig, fresh, ripe, probably magic, but you're too curious to eat. Because today, you're going somewhere no mortal usually goes. Mount Olympus. Now, you may be wondering how the god of tipsy theater kids and emotional release fits in among a pantheon of thunder wielders and tactical geniuses. The truth. At first, he didn't. The Olympian 12 was like an invite-only club, and Dionysus, born from a mortal, raised by nymphs, partial to loud parties and spontaneous nudity, didn't exactly scream, divine board member. The original 12 usually included Hestia, goddess of the hearth, whose entire aesthetic was, please sit down and eat something quietly. Dionysus kind of ruined that mood. So how did he get in? Depending on the version you hear, it wasn't just about divine lineage. It was about impact. Dionysus had followers everywhere. Shrines, cults, festivals. Mortals loved him. And Olympus, much like a brand-conscious startup, knew better than to ignore the numbers. Eventually, he was granted a seat among the 12, bumping poor Hestia from the lineup. She stepped down voluntarily, they say. But you know how that goes. Here's the historical seed behind this switcheroo. The canonical list of the 12 Olympians varied over time and region. While many accepted Dionysus as a member by the classical period, earlier traditions were more fluid. Scholars suggest that his rise to Olympian status reflected the increasing cultural prominence of theater, wine, and mystery cults, areas where Dionysus reigned supreme. And yet, even as an Olympian, he never quite settled in. Dionysus spent more time among mortals than gods. He preferred the dirt to the clouds, the imperfect to the divine. While Zeus ruled with thunder and Poseidon with earthquakes, Dionysus led through music, rhythm, and vulnerability. Still, he did show up at the occasional godly get-together, usually barefoot, late, and carrying a leopard. The other gods didn't always appreciate the vibe shift. Apollo in particular had a tense but fascinating relationship with Dionysus. Apollo was structure, logic, order. Dionysus was instinct, emotion, release. And yet, some mystery schools paired them as complementary forces. Sun and moon, reason and madness, control and surrender. Historians still argue whether these twin energies were meant to be rivals, lovers, or something more cosmic. Here's a fringe tidbit to sip slowly. In some myths, Dionysus didn't just earn a seat, he inherited it. Hestia supposedly handed it over willingly, retreating to tend her hearth, while Dionysus brought the fire. Which raises questions. Was Olympus big enough for both peace and passion? Or did one make room for the other? You imagine the scene, marble thrones, glowing immortals, and Dionysus sauntering in with grapes in his beard and a half-finished poem in his pocket. He doesn't bow. He doesn't gloat. He just is, divine and ridiculous, holy and human. And maybe that's why he fits. Because Olympus wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to reflect us, our jealousy, our joy, our endless, spiraling drama. And Dionysus, he's the god who says, "Yep, it's messy. Pour a drink and tell me how you really feel." You leave Olympus the way you came, in silence, through a cloud of lavender mist. No fanfare, no thunder, just the faint sound of sandals slapping marble and a laugh that echoes a little too long to be entirely mortal. You're back in the vineyard now, but something's changed. Not the place. You've sat beside gods, walked among masks, and watched a dolphin learn a very valuable lesson. And still Dionysus remains, smiling, humming, holding out a fig. You take it this time. It's sweet, and strange, and exactly right. The fig is gone, the juice still sticky on your fingers, and Dionysus has vanished again. Though now you know he never really leaves. You feel him in the breeze, in the rustle of leaves, in the low hum of bees lazing through lavender. You get up, stretch, and begin walking again. You don't know where you're going, but that's kind of the point. The path this time is less forest, more memory. And as it curves between olive trees and sunlit ruins, you start to notice something. Dionysus loved mortals, not just as worshippers, as people. Messy, breakable, passionate people. Most gods kept their distance, issuing prophecies and punishments from the safety of their divine balconies. But Dionysus, he got involved. He showed up, sometimes unannounced, sometimes unrecognizable, sometimes in the middle of a disaster with nothing but a smile and a bouquet of ivy. He wasn't just a god to mortals. He was a god for them. He traveled with them, listened to them, cried with them, lost them. Because yes, Dionysus, for all his wine and wildness, carried a lot of grief. You reach a small grove. Stone benches circle a well, dry now but still echoing with forgotten wishes. Dionysus is here too, in the way grief sits in your chest. And the stories begin to surface, his mortal friends, his companions, his losses. There was Ampelos, a beautiful boy, dear to Dionysus. Some say they were lovers, others just kindred spirits. But the myths agree. Ampelos died young, gored by a bull or flung from a vine, depending on which poet was having a worse day. Dionysus wept. From his tears and the boy's blood, he created the first true grapevine, wine born of sorrow. Then there was Ariadne, abandoned by Theseus on Naxos after helping him survive the labyrinth. Left alone, sleeping on the beach, crown tangled in seaweed. Dionysus found her, lifted her, loved her, married her, according to some versions, immortalized her crown as a constellation. It's still up there, Corona Borealis, a string of stars telling a very old love story. These weren't symbolic flings or fleeting distractions. They were connections. Dionysus, perhaps more than any god, knew how to feel things. Deeply, painfully, joyfully. He loved in the way only someone who has died a little can. And that's why his grief lingers, not as a burden, but as part of the experience. His joy is so big because his losses were real. His laughter is loud because he remembers silence. Here's your historical grounding. Dionysus is one of the only gods in the Greek pantheon consistently portrayed in art and literature with tears. While Zeus thunders and Hera schemes, Dionysus grieves. He feels. That made him relatable. Dangerous, too, but mostly human. Historians still argue whether the stories of Dionysus's lost companions are meant to humanize him, or if they reflect earlier, older myths, fragments of forgotten cults absorbed into his own. Either way, they stuck, and they gave him a tragic edge no other god quite matched. And for your fringe tidbit, in a little-known orphicum, Dionysus is described as the comforter of the dead, the one who brings sweetness even into Hades. He's not just the god of partying. He's the god who stays when the party's over. You sit on one of the stone benches now, hands folded in your lap, and look up. The trees above you are full of light and shadow, the dappled kind that shifts every time you blink. Somewhere, someone plays a low flute. The notes fall like raindrops. Dionysus is beside you again, arms resting on his knees, quiet. Not drunk, not smiling, just present. You don't speak. He doesn't need you to, because here in the stillness is the truth at the center of his chaos. Love. Messy, fleeting, world-breaking love. The kind that leaves you both full and hollow. The kind that lives in laughter and eulogies. He plucks a fig from a tree and splits it open. Inside, wine-colored seeds. Sweet and sour. Everything ends, he says finally, in a voice like velvet and dust. So we celebrate while it lasts. You nod, and keep walking. You follow a winding path down into cooler air, your steps softened by moss and the kind of silence that only exists underground. The rocks here are smooth, worn with centuries of footsteps, pilgrims, priests, maybe even a few ghosts. The walls begin to narrow, and the scent changes. No longer sweet wine and sunlight. Now wet stone, damp earth, a hint of something older than breath. You're entering the underworld. Don't worry, it's not as dramatic as it sounds. There are no shrieking souls, no fiery rivers, no skeletal boatmen demanding exact change. Just a long, spiraling descent into darkness. And Dionysus, of course, walking ahead of you. His torch isn't fire. It's a flickering glow like the inside of a pomegranate. You've followed him through vineyards and parties, through grief and laughter. Now you follow him into death. Because, as it turns out, Dionysus didn't just bring life. He retrieved it. This story, one of his strangest and most powerful, begins with a woman named Semele. His mother, remember her? Vaporized by Zeus's full glory, leaving Dionysus gestating in a thigh. Well, Dionysus never forgot her. After achieving godhood, after bringing wine to the world and slipping his way into Olympus, he decided to go back. Back to the place no god visits lightly, the realm of Hades, the land of shadows and memory. And he didn't go for glory. He didn't go to conquer. He went for his mom. According to the myth, Dionysus descended into the underworld, torch in hand, vines trailing behind him like a green lifeline. He navigated the rivers of the dead, whispered past Cerberus, and charmed Persephone with music and wine. And he found Semele. Then he brought her out. That's right, he returned. With her. Reunited. Resurrected. And when they emerged into the light, he didn't just dust her off and drop her back into obscurity. He made her divine. Gave her a new name, Thy One. Installed her on Olympus. Gave her back the life she lost. It's one of the only myths where someone stays saved. Here's your historical note. Dionysus's rescue of Semele was central to his Orphic cults. These mystery religions taught that the soul could survive death and be reborn through divine intervention, often through Dionysus. His descent wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a prototype for spiritual rebirth, a symbol of hope in a world obsessed with fate. Historians still argue whether the tale reflects an older agricultural metaphor, the seed buried and rising again, or if it points to actual rituals in which initiates symbolically died and returned. Whatever the case, it made Dionysus unique, a god who bridged the realms of life and death, joy and sorrow. Here's a fringe detail. In some late Roman interpretations, Dionysus and Hades were seen as two faces of the same god, two moods of the same force. One above ground, pouring wine. One below, pouring silence. You stop at the bottom of the path, and the air feels like velvet. The kind of velvet that clings to your breath and smells faintly of rosemary and endings. Dionysus kneels beside a shallow pool, touches the water, and whispers something too soft to hear. A shape forms, gentle, glowing, unmistakably maternal. Semele. Her face is familiar from old statues, but here she's younger, less tragic. Her eyes meet yours, and there's no fear in them, just warmth. You don't stay long. The underworld isn't for lingering. Dionysus rises, offers you a hand, and leads you back up the spiral path, torch trailing gold behind him like a vine of light. You reach the surface just as the sun breaks the horizon, and the world explodes in color. It smells like oranges and old myths. You're not sure if any of it was real. But then again, reality was never really the point. Dionysus turns to you, brushing dust from his robe, and grins. Death's not the end, he says. It's just a really long intermission. And then he's walking again, up the path, toward wherever the next story waits. The light after the underworld feels unreal, too bright, too golden, like you've stepped onto a stage before the curtain rises. Dionysus walks ahead, back in his element now, swirling a goblet that seems to refill itself with whatever emotion he's in the mood to taste. The air has changed again. There's a new sound, voices, laughter, applause. You follow him toward it, into what looks like a hillside hollowed into rows of stone seats. An ancient amphitheater. Dionysus smiles as he steps into the orchestra, the flat space at the center of the theater, and spreads his arms like a magician about to announce something wonderful and mildly concerning. Because here's a twist you didn't see coming. Dionysus, god of wine, madness, and dancing, was also the god of theater. Yes, theater. The stage. The mask. The drama. If you've ever cried at a movie, lost yourself in a role, or accidentally memorized the entire plot of a soap opera, congratulations. You've been blessed by Dionysus. It all began with festivals, huge, chaotic, week-long celebrations in his honor. The most famous? The city Dionysia in Athens. Picture it. A massive crowd crammed into an open-air theater. 3 full days of plays, no bathroom breaks, and definitely not enough snacks. Tragedies in the morning, comedies in the afternoon, drunken debating in between. It was the Super Bowl of the soul. Here's your historical grounding. The city Dionysia was one of the cornerstone events of Athenian life. Politicians made speeches. Citizens watched new dramas by playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, many of whom treated the stage like a pulpit, wrestling with morality, war, fate, and fear. And it all happened under the eye of Dionysus. Why him? Because theater, like wine, was about transformation, about becoming someone else to understand yourself, about losing the mask of everyday life to slip into something more honest. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's role in theater was original or adopted over time, as drama became a more prominent civic ritual. But no one questions his connection to the idea of performance, of shedding identity, speaking truth through fiction, and letting chaos teach you something. The fringe detail tonight. In early performances, the actors wore masks not just for show, but because the mask itself was believed to channel Dionysus. They weren't pretending to be someone. They became someone. The god flowed through the actor like wine in a cup. You weren't just watching a character. You were watching a visitation. And the chorus. The group of masked performers who chanted and danced and delivered commentary? They weren't just background noise. They were the collective voice of humanity, laughing when you couldn't, crying when you wouldn't. You sit on the stone steps of the amphitheater now and watch as Dionysus pantomimes a scene. He plays every role, the hero, the fool, the god, the goat. He spins, stumbles, weeps, and laughs in a single breath. He falls to the earth, then leaps into the air as though reborn. The sky applauds with a sudden gust of wind. And then he stops, bows low, holds up a mask made of bark and silver. He offers it to you. You hesitate, but only for a moment, because Dionysus isn't asking you to pretend. He's asking you to remember that you've worn many faces, that you've told many stories, that inside you is both the script and the improvisation. The theater isn't an escape. It's a mirror, and the god who laughs behind the curtain is simply reminding you that it's okay to play. You slip the mask on. It's warm, and the world doesn't disappear. It unfolds. The mask falls away gently, like a petal in slow motion, and you blink yourself back into the vineyard. It's dusk again, or maybe dawn. With Dionysus, time isn't so much linear as it is pleasantly wobbly. You're seated under a fig tree, the leaves still whispering about the play you just watched, acted in. You're not quite sure anymore. Across from you, Dionysus lounges on a low couch that definitely wasn't there a minute ago. His robe is softer now, his crown more casual, more like someone braided wildflowers into his curls during a nap. He lifts a cup but doesn't drink yet. He's watching you. There's a new question in the air. You feel it before he asks it. Who is Dionysus, really? A wine god? A party planner for the cosmos? A grief-soaked wanderer? A resurrected son? The answer is yes. And also none of those, quite, because Dionysus didn't just blur lines. He erased them. Between joy and sorrow, life and death, reason and madness, and perhaps most of all, between male and female. That's what this part of the story is about. You see, Dionysus was, and remains, a god of fluidity. Not just in personality, but in gender, expression, form. He appears in myths both bearded and clean-shaven, draped in furs and flowers, painted in gold and coal. Sometimes he's soft, other times fierce. Sometimes distinctly masculine, other times beautifully ambiguous. He wasn't trying to confuse anyone. He just didn't care about categories. This made the Greeks very uncomfortable and very curious. Here's your historical sip. In classical art and literature, Dionysus is often depicted as androgynous. Not just youthful, but deliberately unplaceable. Not manly in the Ares or Zeus sense, but not womanly either. Something freer, closer to nature, or dreams, or truth. And yes, there were rituals where worshippers cross-dressed in his honor. Men wore fawnskins and let their hair grow. Women wielded thyrsi, those pinecone-tipped staffs, and roared through the night like tigers who had learned how to laugh. Dionysus welcomed all of it. Historians still argue whether these acts were truly subversive or just symbolic. Were they challenging gender roles, or simply flipping them for the night? But if you asked Dionysus, as you kind of are, he'd probably shrug and pour you another glass. Why choose, he'd say. Why limit? And here's your fringe detail. In one rare Orphic fragment, Dionysus is called the womanly man and the manly woman, a fusion of both, revered not despite the contradiction but because of it. His divinity wasn't a rejection of human complexity. It was a celebration of it. You shift, thinking of all the roles you've played. Daughter, son, friend, stranger. Strong, soft, silent, loud. Dionysus doesn't ask you to pick just one. He holds up a mirror made of grape skins and smoke and says, yes, that's all you. Keep going. He finally drinks, a slow sip, and passes the cup to you. It tastes different now. Not sweet, not bitter, just real. And that's the core of it, isn't it? Dionysus is the god who says yes to contradictions, who says you are allowed to change, to feel everything, to break the mold, to make your own. He leans back, eyes half-lidded, and murmurs something half in song, half in memory. You don't understand the words, but you feel them like a breeze down your spine. A blessing, maybe, or a challenge, or both. The stars blink awake above you, slow and forgiving. You stay seated, grounded now, as vines climb the edges of your thoughts. And through them, a soft voice says, not in words, but in wine-warm knowing, you are more than one thing. And that's divine. The stars above you pulse gently, a lullaby in light. They shift slowly, no longer pinned in place by constellations or mythology, but drifting like they're tipsy themselves, swaying to music you can't quite hear. Dionysus lies beside you now, stretched out in the grass, eyes half closed, a handful of grapes in one palm and a fig leaf lazily covering his face. This is the end, you realize, not of him, not of the world, but of the story, or at least this version of it. And like everything Dionysus touches, it ends not with a bang, but with a toast. The final cup. He lifts it toward you, not solemnly, not theatrically, just simply, like a friend handing you tea after a long night. You made it, he says, his voice like wind through reeds. You clink cups, not because it's a tradition, just because it feels like the right thing to do. Tonight, you've wandered through myths that were never supposed to make sense. A god born from a thigh, a woman turned into a constellation, pirates turned into dolphins, madness as sacred, masks as truth, grief as celebration. You've seen how Dionysus slips through boundaries like wine through fingers, always present, always changing, never quite containable. He's the god who didn't ask for power but earned it anyway, who didn't shout his divinity, but whispered it into laughter and love and longing. And now, under the fig tree, with a belly full of stories and a mind soft around the edges, you feel it too. That sleepy understanding, that warm, fuzzy chaos that says you don't have to have it all figured out. Not tonight, because Dionysus isn't the god of answers. He's the god of the in-between, the god of cozy chaos. Here's your last historical anchor to tuck into your pocket like a dried fig. In rural Greek villages, even long after the rise of monotheism, people still poured the first sip of wine onto the earth and murmured his name, just in case, just to say thanks, just to remember. Historians still argue whether Dionysus was ever real, whether he came from Thrace, Phrygia, or a particularly enthusiastic vineyard, whether he was a metaphor, a memory, or a mask worn too long. But you've walked his path, danced his circle, sat beside his sorrow and his joy, and your final fringe detail. In a few obscure myths, Dionysus appears not as a man, or even as a god, but as a whisper in the vines, a rustle in the fig leaves, a warmth in your chest after the first sip, something you don't see until you're still enough to feel it. You lie down, grass cool beneath you, the stars like little lullabies humming you to sleep. Dionysus breathes deeply beside you, one arm flung over his chest, the other cradling a wine jug like a teddy bear. You close your eyes, and the world, for now, softens. Wind down 300 words. Let your body melt into the quiet now. No more masks. No more myths to carry. Just breath. Just softness. The grass beneath you is warm, like it remembers the sun. The night air is heavy with the scent of figs, of grapes pressed into memory, of stories told too many times to stay the same. You feel your limbs relax, like vines uncoiling in the dark. Every muscle releasing, every thought loosening its grip. You are here. You are safe. You are enough. The whisper of leaves is slow now, slower than the wind itself. You can still hear Dionysus's breath beside you, deep, even, like someone who's been tired for centuries and finally decided to rest. You follow that rhythm. In, out. No need to chase dreams tonight. Let them come to you. Let them carry you gently, like a boat on a wine-dark sea, like a grape in a warm hand. You are not lost. You are simply wandering, and tomorrow will wait. But for now, there's only this moment, this softness, this warm, ridiculous, beautiful god curled beside you, humming lullabies in a language older than fear. Sleep now, little reveler. Sleep like someone who's been seen and still accepted. Sleep like someone who knows the party never really ends. It just gets quieter. And as your breath slows, you can almost hear him whisper, "Sure, don't worry. I'll save you a seat at the next festival." Sweet dreams.